Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Nehami and these are the headlines. Palestine's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki says Arab countries must reject the UAE-Israel deal to normalize their relations. Speaking at a virtual meeting of the Arab League, he said the deal has undermined the position of Arab states on the Palestinian cause. Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister said the kingdom supports the establishment of a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The United States has decided to withdraw around 2,200 troops from Iraq this month. This would reduce the number of U.S. troops in Iraq to 3,000. The head of the U.S. Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, said they will continue to assist Iraqi forces in rooting out ISIS militants. China says the U.S. is trying to incite instability with proposed orders to block imports from the Xinjiang region over alleged human rights violations. At a press briefing, the Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Washington has no right to intervene in China's internal affairs. U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials have prepared orders to block imports of cotton and tomato products from Xinjiang. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. Palestine's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki says that Arab countries must reject a UAE-Israel deal to normalize their relations. Speaking at a virtual ministerial meeting of the Arab League, he said the deal has undermined the position of Arab states on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister called for the establishment of a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Faisal bin Farhan Al-Saud said Saudi Arabia supports all efforts to reach a comprehensive solution to the dispute. Last month, the UAE and Israel announced that they will open embassies in each other's territory. The UAE brokered agreement sparked criticism from several Muslim states, including Turkey and Iran. Palestine denounced the deal as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. But Washington says more Arab countries will recognize Israel soon. U.S. President Donald Trump has been nominated for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize just weeks after brokering a peace deal between Israel and the UAE. In his nomination letter, Norway's lawmaker Christian Tybring-Gjedde praised Trump's efforts for resolving conflicts worldwide. Norway's lawmaker Christian Tybring-Gjedde said Trump meets the three conditions needed to win the Peace Prize. He said Trump stimulated fellowship among nations through dialogue, reduced the standing armies, and promoted peace congresses. Tybring-Gjedde said the historic Israel-UAE agreement can turn the Middle East into a region of cooperation and prosperity. Four of the U.S. presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Jimmy Carter, and Barack Obama, have won the Nobel Peace Prize so far. The 2021 winner will not be announced until October next year. The Arab coalition fighting in Yemen says it has downed an explosive-laden drone over the Aba airport in Saudi Arabia's Asir province. State media said the drone was aimed at civilians in the kingdom's southern area before being shot down. Claiming a responsibility, Houthi spokesman Yahya Sarrai said the drones targeted Saudi military and sensitive objects in the airport. The Saudi-led coalition has been at war with the Houthi rebels who ousted the Yemeni government in Sana'a in 2015. The United States has decided to withdraw around 2,200 troops from Iraq this month. This would reduce the number of U.S. troops in Iraq to 3,000. The head of the U.S. Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, said they will continue to assist Iraqi forces in rooting out ISIS militants. The move is part of US President Donald Trump's plan to pull all troops out of Iraq as soon as possible. In January, Iraq's parliament passed a resolution demanding the complete withdrawal of the US troops following the murder of Iran's General Qasem Soleimani. At least 37 million people have been displaced by the US war on terror that began at the start of this century. A report by the Costs of War Project says the estimate is conservative and the real total could be far higher. This report has more.
Brown University's Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs estimates that between 48 and 59 million people were displaced by the US global war on terror. The report focuses on 8 conflict zones including Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia and the Philippines. The report says in Pakistan some 3.7 million people were displaced while about 5.3 million people were uprooted in Afghanistan. It says Libya saw at least 1.2 million displacements in what the IDMC called a state collapse triggered mass displacement. Iraq has the largest number with 9.2 million people displaced by several wars, with the data only focused on just 5 provinces. In Somalia, some 4.2 million were forced to move, and Yemen recorded 4.4 million displacements as a result of direct US operations. The Philippines, the only Southeast Asian country on the list, saw 1.7 million people forced to migrate internally. The report says although 25.3 million people have returned, that does not erase the trauma of displacement.
Pakistan says the UN Human Rights Office has documented a worsening situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir in the last 1 year. In a series of tweets, a Pakistani mission to the United Nations said an OIC contact group in Geneva briefed the UN Human Rights Commissioner on the latest situation in the occupied valley during an online meeting. Is that the contact group urged the UN Commissioner to continue monitoring human rights violations in the territory. Last year, India illegally revoked the special status of occupied Kashmir in violation of the UN Security Council resolutions and imposed a curfew. Since then, Indian occupation troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris and arrested dozens of politicians. Pakistan and the UK have agreed to further strengthen bilateral cooperation in all areas of common interest. In a video teleconference, Foreign Secretary Suhail Mahmood and British Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth, Lord Tariq Ahmad, discussed bilateral cooperation, regional situation and multilateral issues, including climate change and Commonwealth. Mahmood highlighted the grave situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He said there is a need for the international community to play its part for a peaceful resolution of Jammu and Kashmir dispute. The Foreign Secretary also reiterated Pakistan's steadfast support for the Afghan peace process. The two sides appreciated their close collaboration that resulted in timely repatriation of stranded nationals due to COVID-19. 2 members of Myanmar's military have confessed to Rohingya genocide in the International Criminal Court. In a statement, the international rights group Fortify Rights said the 2 soldiers admitted to killing some 118 Muslims and burying them in mass graves. The troops said their senior commanders ordered them to kill all Rohingya Muslims in September 2017. The soldiers have provided the names of 17 direct perpetrators from the army, including a lieutenant colonel, a colonel and 3 captains. They claimed these officials ordered or contributed to atrocities against Rohingya in the Rakhine state. Fortify Rights said this is the first time ever the perpetrators from Myanmar could be tried at the ICC. The group said these 2 soldiers may become insider witnesses. 11 people have died and many others are missing after a ferry capsized following a collision with a sand-laden vessel in Bangladesh's Gumai River. The district administrator of Netrokona said the boat was carrying around 40 passengers. He said the dead include 5 children and 3 women. The administrator said the rescue operation is still underway. Hundreds of people die each year in ferry accidents in Bangladesh. Afghanistan's first Vice President Amarullah Saleh has narrowly dodged death after his convoy was bombed in the capital Kabul. In a statement, his spokesman said Afghanistan's enemy once again tried to harm Saleh but failed. He said Saleh was on his way to office when the explosion occurred in the Tiamani area of the capital. Police say 10 people were killed and 16 others wounded in the attack. No group has claimed the responsibility yet. Now, India's coronavirus cases have jumped to nearly 4.4 million as almost 90,000 people tested positive, while more than 1,100 died overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed over 898,000 lives, while infecting over 27.4 million. More in this report.
Hopes of battling the COVID-19 monster anytime soon have been dampened, at least for the western part of the globe. Leading vaccine candidate of the West, AstraZeneca has suspended its phase 3 trials after a volunteer fell ill. But the company says this does not mean the vaccine is off the table. While President Donald Trump promises Americans a cure sooner than they think, the second wave of the virus continues to wreak havoc in India while the country slips deeper into economic strife. Criticism of Prime Minister Narendra Modi grows in the country as starvation pushes people to borrow at hefty interest rates from private lenders.
We lost all work, my husband and everyone else's husband as well. Modi shut down all the means of employment because of this disease, but he can't shut down the hunger, of course. So we took money from Praya's group and started carrying the earning responsibility of the family. My husband was a little unwell, so I had to work.
Greece has joined the list of European countries where the second wave of COVID-19 is now getting a foothold. Australia's sigh of relief over a decline in the cases has been short-lived as new infections spike once again in the lockdown state of Victoria. State's premier has been facing severe criticism over the extension of restrictions and arrests of those who have been violating them.
We'd all like to be open tomorrow, myself included. But to do that is not an act of leadership. That is to cave to some of the pressure that's there, to be driven by the anger instead of the epidemiology, to be driven by opinion instead of science and data and doctors.
South Korea's defiant churches are facing backlash for flouting retractions and becoming hotspots for cluster infections. Meanwhile, Egypt has lifted some travel restrictions and resumed flights to and from Moscow.
In Pakistan, 9 people have died from COVID-19, while 426 tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll is at 6,359. The ministry said over 286,000 patients have recovered so far. It said the number of active cases has declined to 6,794. The ministry said the countrywide caseload is over 299,000. Sindh remains the most affected province with over 130,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 97,000 cases so far. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. France has told its businesses to prepare for the risks of a no-deal Brexit. This comes after London hinted at not implementing some parts of the Brexit deal agreed with the European Union. The French junior trade minister, Ferry, said trade companies in the country need to be ready in case the Brexit agreement is avoided by London's actions. Ferry said Paris needs to make sure that our British partners respect their commitments. Meanwhile, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has arrived in London for the crunch talks with the UK to broker a post-Brexit trade deal. Britain will set out new details or blueprint of a life outside the European Union in today's meeting. China says the US is trying to incite instability with proposed orders to block imports from the Xinjiang region over alleged human rights violations. At a press briefing, the Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Washington has no right to intervene in China's internal affairs. Zhao said the decision is also a pretext to oppress Chinese customers. US Customs and Border Protection officials have prepared orders to block imports of cotton and tomato products from Xinjiang. The group of 7 countries has condemned the alleged poisoning of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. In a statement, the G7 foreign ministers called on Russia to apprehend the people responsible for the poisoning. The G7 statement said the use of any sort of chemical weapon is intolerable under any circumstances. It said Navalny was surely poisoned after a Berlin hospital found traces of a Soviet-style Novichok nerve agent in his blood. Russia denies Germany's claim, saying there is no evidence of the alleged poisoning. Navalny was airlifted to Germany after falling ill on a Russian domestic flight last month. Belarus embattled President Alexander Lukashenko has hinted at fresh polls amid ongoing protests over the disputed election. In an interview, Lukashenko said he may have been in power for too long. However, he is ready to reform the constitution. Lukashenko refused to hold talks with the Opposition Coordination Council amid calls from the EU for a political dialogue. Meanwhile, the exiled opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, has called for the international sanctions against the Minsk regime. Virtually addressing the Council of Europe, Tikhanovskaya said the regime is violating international norms and human rights. At least 7,000 protesters have been arrested in demonstrations calling for Lukashenko's resignation after 26 years in power. British police have charged a man with 1 count of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Police arrested Zephaniah McLeod on suspicion of murder after the series of stabbings in the central city of Birmingham. In a statement, the Crown Prosecution Service said the man was charged after considering the evidence amid an ongoing investigation. The detective said the stabbings were not linked to terrorism. A man died after being stabbed on Sunday, while a man and a woman are hospitalized in critical condition. The U.S. Treasury Department has blacklisted 2 former Lebanese ministers over their alleged ties to Hezbollah. It accused the 2 of providing material and financial help to Hezbollah. In a statement, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Hezbollah has exploited the Lebanese political system to spread its malign influence. Mnuchin said corruption has run rampant in Lebanon and that the U.S. stands with the people in their calls for reforms. Lebanon has been reeling from its worst financial crisis, and in the latest blow, a massive blast ripped through the port in Beirut last month, destroying the country's main grain silo. Fires have broken out at a refugee camp on Greece's island of Lesbos, forcing thousands to flee. The facility was placed under quarantine last week after 35 COVID-19 cases were reported in asylum seekers. There have been no reports of casualties. Officials say initial reports suggest fires broke out at different locations. A government spokesman says the cause of arson is under investigation and a state of emergency will be declared across the island. The Moria facility has been frequently criticized by aid groups for poor living conditions. It hosts some 12,000 people, more than 4 times its capacity. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that humanity will be doomed if world powers are not united to curb climate change. In an interview, Guterres said countries must retool their economies for a green future. He called for the nations to use the pandemic as a springboard to launch transformational measures to wean societies off fossil fuels. Guterres said the governments must invest in renewables and commit to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Record floods in Sudan have threatened sites housing the royal pyramids of Meroe and Nuri. The Interior Ministry says 102 people have died in the floods, while tens of thousands of houses have been destroyed. The rise in groundwater has jeopardized the country's archaeological sites, some 350 kilometers from the capital Khartoum. Head of the Museums Authority, Hatim Al-Nuh, says the teams have been working to protect the site from being swamped. The Nuri pyramids include the tomb of Taharqa, who ruled over islands in modern-day Sudan and Egypt in the 7th century BC. Residents of flooded areas say they fear worse is yet to come. Iran and Turkey have discussed ways to materialize $3 billion of trade exchanges earlier agreed by the both sides. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says the two sides had productive discussions in the 6th Iran-Turkey High-Level Cooperation Council meeting. Zarif said Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan co-chaired the council meeting virtually. He said the leaders discussed cooperation in the energy, transportation and tourism sectors. An official said the two sides also mulled over ways to help establish peace in Syria. He said other regional issues, including the Palestine cause and hostile behavior of some states, were also on the agenda. Euro stocks have edged up with the European Union and the UK set to negotiate the post-Brexit trade agreement. European stock 600 is trading 0.5% higher. London's FTSE 100 has gained over 0.5%, while Frankfurt's DAX has claimed almost 1%. CAC 40 in Paris too has edged up fractionally. Earlier markets in Asia Pacific declined following tumbling Wall Street shares after the leading COVID-19 vaccine trials hit a snag. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.